Good morning, Salem Grace Church family. This is an important and very exciting time in the life of this amazing church. I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but last year, 2014, Salem Grace was number 20 in the USA Canada Nazarene churches in growing your church through reaching into the lives of unchurched people in your community. Your influence in Salem is huge. In fact, I believe that the influence of Salem Grace in the community of Salem, the surrounding county right now, is probably greater than any other time in your history. But not only Salem, your influence across the district is very important to me as you take the lead in fulfilling the Great Commission and allowing other churches to see what can happen in a church when you allow God to really work in the life of the church. These are good days for us, days that we want to see continue as I believe the very best days are yet ahead of this church. I want to tell you of an incident that happened to me a few months ago. I was driving through Salem, going to another church. I had a couple meetings that day, and about 8 miles out of town, very clearly the Lord began to speak to my heart about bringing the name of Trent Ice to the table in the conversation we were having as we were looking for a new pastor for this church. My first response was, Lord, that's a little bit out of the box. I knew Trent was called to ministry. He was local licensed. We have him on the track for district license and ordination, but a church like Salem, this was a little bit out of the ordinary. And yet, through the day, I sensed that God was speaking to me. I spent the day praying as I was in the car, turned the radio off, wanted to hear God's voice, His direction, make sure that it was God speaking to me. Had a couple of confirmations on that through the day that God was speaking to me about this issue. So a couple of weeks later, I bring His name to the table to your leadership team, told them that the reason I'm bringing this is because I felt in obedience to God, I needed to put the name on the table. I was amazed with the response from the leadership team that people had spoken to them already. What about Trent? Is this a possibility? And we began the process of determining what God's direction, what His will is. I felt all along that God was not necessarily telling me that he was to be the next pastor, but I knew that in obedience, I was to bring him to the table for His purposes, for whatever he wanted to accomplish. So we spent a number of meetings praying and seeking God. We looked at 6 resumes total. I looked at many more than that, but intense prayer, great conversation, weighing through what God has in store for this amazing church. And a few nights ago, we come to the conclusion that we need to bring the name of Trent Ice to the congregation for a congregational vote in a couple of weeks. I think of the uniqueness of the Salem Grace Church. I think of Kevin Donahoe, who was such a great leader in this church and actually grew up in the church out of the box. For you guys to put him in as pastor was out of the box, and yet we saw God bless and work in his ministry. I got to teach a class with him a couple of weeks ago and discovered what an amazing, spiritually powerful young man that he is. Enjoyed getting to know him better. And then Mike Kraemer being here for the time that he was here, I still don't completely understand why it was as short as it is. Yet I know this for sure, that God worked through him while he was here, and God is working through him as he's planting a church, possibly taking some of the fingerprints of Salem Grace with him as he plants that new church in Bismarck. So, I want you to know that as we continue on in this process, there's nothing I want more than God's will and God's blessing upon this great church. I love this church. I love the people of this church. I want God's power and presence to be so real to you in the next days. So I want to encourage you to pray with us. Ask any question that you need to ask. Don't be afraid to talk with board members about this process, how we came to this conclusion, and let's trust that the Lord is going to lead us and guide us in our vote in a couple of weeks, that we will land exactly in the middle of His will. My hope and prayer again is that Salem will have its very best days ahead of you. I'm praying that way. I'm trusting God for that. I'm excited about your future. I will be praying for you on that particular day of the vote. God bless you. Let's all work together to find His will for this great church.
Today with a time of worship.